Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Well, body scanners are in the news this past week after the failed attempt to blow up an airliner recently. And of course, this means huge bonus bucks to companies that produce scanners, air body scanners. We're talking about a company called OSI Systems, Inc., up 11%. Let me tell you, folks, this whole war on terror business is making a mint for a lot of these folks. Now, my solution to this whole body scanning situation is to bring back something that was popular back in the 1960s. If any of you recall, Eldridge Cleaver, one of the founding members of the Black Panthers, he came up with what he called the Eldridge Cleaver pants with the cleaver sleeve. As you can see, the male genitalia is featured in a pocket outside of the clothes. So what I'm recommending is that anybody who's trying to get a flight into the U.S. simply get yourself one of these Eldridge Cleaver pants, have your dangling bits dangling outside so that the ghoulish kind of weird masochistic sexual pseudo nincompoops at the airline checkpoints can check out your package in real time. They don't need the scanner. This might actually be a reason to sell the scanner company short. Imagine if everybody wore these Eldridge Cleaver genitalia revealing pants, then shares in OSI Systems would probably crash 20%. So it might even be a good short sale if you're willing to show a little of your package to get through airport security. Let's bring in political analyst Stacy Herbert to talk about this and other stories. Welcome back to the show, Stacy Herbert.
Max, well, yes, the full body scanner welcomed us into the new year, but I have 5 themes to look for in markets, finance, and scandal for 2010.
All right, 5 themes for 2010. Lay it on me.
And these are themes followed by no comment headlines. They just describe everything it is about the...
I like that. It makes my job easier.
The first theme for 2010 is the second leg down of the global financial collapse. It's also the collapse of the U.S. empire as power shifts from the west to the east, to the BRIC nations, Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey.
Right.
So headline reads, U.S. growth prospects bleak in new decade.
Yeah, that's right. Because the growth of the past 10 years, Stacy, has been fueled entirely by debt. Now, I was reading on Carl Denninger, who's an excellent market commentator at his website, Carl Denninger. He made the point that for the U.S. to grow anywhere near the rate it's been growing for the past 10 to 15 years, they've got to take on another $90 trillion in debt, which means they've got to sell another $90 trillion in debt to their foreign creditors, including China and other forces around the world. And these countries are selling American debt. So there's no way they're going to be able to sell another $90 trillion in debt. Therefore, there's no way the U.S. economy can grow anywhere near the rate it has been growing. Unemployment skyrocketing, and everyone's down at the airport looking at everyone go through the airport screeners in their Eldridge Cleaver pants. I got a picture of me on my Eldridge Cleaver pants already. You see my face on the thing there, looking good, yeah.
I saw it in the back of a magazine somewhere. Okay, second headline, second theme for 2010.
Yeah.
Crime will continue to pay, and we see that in this headline, Iraq outraged as judge throws out Blackwater case.
Yeah. Well, of course, Iraqis would be outraged. I mean, what the Blackwater case was that the Blackwater mercenaries that paid killers were caught killing people, right?
Well, they killed over a dozen people in Nisor Square in Iraq, and by all accounts and all witnesses, that it was just a massacre. They just massacred a bunch of Iraqis. Now, the courts in the U.S. determined that it's just a matter of national security, and that Blackwater is exempt from any sort of laws against murder.
Right. They're not saying they did murder them. They're just saying that they're exempt from any charges of murder.
Yeah, the U.S. Army's own investigation into it found that basically it was murder and a massacre.
But they did it for companies like OSI Systems.
Exactly. But that's the theme, is that crime will continue to pay, whether you're Goldman Sachs or Blackwater or any U.S. Corporation acting on behalf of the empire that is now collapsing.
Murder.
Number 3, theme for 2010 is sovereign debt crises, and that is seen in these headlines. Britain's debt now a riskier proposition than Italy, and U.S. in fiscal peril with $12.1 trillion debt.
Britain is looking like Reykjavik on the Thames, isn't it? The British pound particularly looks vulnerable.
Well, as we see, everybody's been saying, oh, we have green shoots of recovery, but the entire recovery, and whether you see it in the retail sales numbers from Christmas time in the West, is that Americans and Brits are once again resorting to debt, just like their governments. All there is debt remaining in the West. There's nothing but debt. So you've got to look to the East for any sort of capital to go.
Right, and of course the East is busy printing up lots of money themselves and going into kind of an interesting situation there as a way to keep their currencies low, to continue to force feed American consumers like ducks on a foie gras farm.
That's right. And then the next headline, number 4, this is, again, the fourth theme for 2010, real wars. So we're going to see Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama lead the various killing sprees around the world, mostly in Muslim countries. We'll see Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Iran, perhaps one or two more nations added to this list where U.S. Predator drones will be dropping bombs from 30,000 feet in the air. And we see this with a headline, Lieberman, Yemen will be tomorrow's war if preemptive action not taken.
Well, I'd like to see Barack Obama with one of these Eldridge Cleaver pocket pants.
Well, actually, it would be Lieberman, because Lieberman is quoted in these articles about the full body scanner needed. Calls for full body screening devices grow after terror attempt. Now, Joe Lieberman is leading the charge on this. He's saying that forget privacy concerns. This is more important to stop any potential terrorist boarding a flight.
Yeah, I'd like to see Joe Lieberman's wife with one of these Eldridge Cleaver package pants. She's the one who needs it, really, in that family. Remember the presidential election? She was all over the news, strutting her package pretty aggressively. Joe's kind of a cowering, husband in the corner.
And then number 5 theme for 2010 is the fake wars, talking about the global war on terror. We also have the war against Wall Street. Here's a headline, War on Wall Street as Congress sees returning to Glass-Steagall. I'd say just don't believe any of this story about potential reform of Wall Street. It's not going to happen.
Don't believe the hype! Don't believe the hype!
Now, Max,
no, it's never going to happen, the reform of Wall Street. Never, ever going to happen. Because Goldman Sachs, you're going to stop Goldman Sachs? It's like stopping an unstoppable force. They're totally destroying the world with high-frequency trading.
Now, I have some headlines that actually encapsulate all of these into one. And this is the big headline this past week. Iceland agrees to repay British and Dutch savers $5.4 billion. So the parliament in Iceland in the past week has voted to pay back 320,000 savers in the UK and the Netherlands $5.4 billion they lost when the Icelandic banking system collapsed, taking down Landesbanki with it, and iSave, which was the savings account offered to Dutch and UK savers.
Yeah.
So now to put this into context, Iceland's population in total is 320,000 people. So all 100% of every single Icelandic citizen is now going to pay back these 320,000 savers in the UK and Netherlands. This will amount to 12,000 euros per Icelandic person, whether it's a baby or an adult, and that's 40% of Iceland's GDP.
Well, they'd be stupid to do that. I mean, Icelanders, which we did a film in Iceland, and we told them a year before the collapse it was going to collapse. Now, because of some greedy bankers who leveraged the economy 10 to 1, lost, but paid themselves $1 billion anyway. Why don't they do this, Icelandic people? Why don't you not pay back this money, track down the guys, the billionaires now who stole your money, and bring them down to the ocean front and drown them like diseased cats?
Well, the former chairman, half owner of Landesbanki, which is the bank that collapsed, losing this $5.4 billion for the UK and Netherlands savers, was Thor Bjorgolfsson.
I'm sorry. Do you need a handkerchief?
Thor Bjorgolfsson. He's the richest man in Iceland. He's a billionaire. He's the first billionaire in Iceland. There's no talk of whether or not he's going to be handing over just a mere 12,000 euros or some of his billions.
Well, he's a robber baron. He's a robber baron.
Now, when this legislation just passed the parliament in Iceland. There were shouts of treason coming from the opposition in the parliament. And the president of the country still needs to sign this legislation into law. And there's been over 40,000 Icelandic citizens who have signed it.
How come there are not 300,000 Icelandic citizens signing against this? Because why? They want to get an easy out through joining the euro? Look, you join the euro, you're going to lose all your fishing rights anyway to the European Union. So you're stupid if you think you're going to get any benefit from signing on to this program.
So you were talking about Goldman Sachs earlier. This brings me to my next headline about, the global war on terror, fake wars, real wars. Goldman Sachs evades taxes, takes TARP funds.
Of course.
So after being granted the TARP bailout funds by their...
Hold on a second. I have to interrupt for a second. The thing about it is the head of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, he's been caught with his hands in the cookie jar time and time again. The whole firm is dedicated to undermining the U.S. economy, undermining the global economy, stealing money. He says he's doing God's work. The guy who recently hijacked the plane with the underwear bomb over Detroit, he claims he's doing God's work. What's the difference between Lloyd Blankfein and the suicide bomber over Detroit? They both think they're doing God's work. We're both doing incredibly terrible damage to the economy. Why selectively we treat the guy who was going to blow up the plane as a criminal/terrorist, and Lloyd Blankfein we treat like some kind of American hero or international hero, as they've done in the Financial Times at the end of the year? That's completely bogus. They're both financial terrorists. They're both terrorists. Blankfein and that other guy. They're both terrorists.
Well, after receiving the TARP bailout funds from his good friend, Hank Paulson, the former Treasury Secretary, it turns out that Goldman Sachs this year, they'll be paying 1% tax rate on their $2.3 billion in profits. And the reason they give for this, why they're only paying 1% on their income, is that it's due to changes in their geographic earnings mix. This means that most of their income is apparently coming from the Cayman Islands. That's where they're earning their money, apparently, not from the U.S. taxpayer.
Yeah, well, it would be great if everybody had the same privileges, not just the privileged class in Goldman Sachs. That's why there's going to be class war in 2010. I predict class war in 2010, social unrest, major. Go ahead.
Now, speaking of the Cayman Islands, which was a haven for pirates for over 100 years in the 18th century, this takes us to the final headline. Here's the future Goldman Sachs bankers of Africa. Pirate ransom money may explain Kenya property boom. So while property prices are collapsing in the U.S. and many other parts of the world, property prices have actually doubled or tripled in the last 5 years in Kenya. And now Kenya is blaming the Somali pirates for taking all their ransom money and bringing and investing it in property in Nairobi.
It's the same thing in the Hamptons. All the Goldman Sachs bankers steal money and they build up property prices in the Hamptons. All right, Stacy Herbert, political analyst for Keiser Report. Thanks for being on the show. See you next week.
Thank you, Max.
Now, when we come back from break, I'll be talking with Johan Thorkelson about what's happening in Iceland, so don't go away.
It was the first and only military usage of that weapon. Thousands of people vanished in a moment, but their shadows still were seen. Millions of survivors became victims of a terrible experiment. And it's still going on. Atomic wounds on RT.
Life in Russia would be so much brighter if you knew more about someone from first impressions. Meetfriends.rt.com.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Let's go to Iceland to talk to Johannes Thorkelson. I'll get that the name pronounced better directly from Johannes in a moment. He's from indefense.Iceland or .is. Johannes, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
And your last name is pronounced, for me, how is it pronounced?
Skulason.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, welcome to the Keiser Report. Now, Johannes, what is happening in Iceland? What exactly is this legislation that the parliament passed this week? What does it say?
It says that the Icelandic taxpayers will foot the bill for a private bank operating in Britain that failed at draconian interest. Okay.
Joe, just to refresh the memories of those who are not up on this, the bankers in Iceland made a money market savings account available to savers in Britain that paid an extraordinary rate of interest, much higher than they could possibly afford, given the underlying economics of Iceland. Then they took all the money they sucked from Britain and from the Netherlands, and they used that to finance an even greater political and financial gamble by buying out huge enterprises in the UK and around the world. Basically, they leveraged the entire GDP, the entire wealth of Iceland. They took it to the global casino market, that is the global banking system. They put it all on red in the global roulette wheel. They lost, and now they want the Icelandic people to pay for that bad bet. Is that correct?
Well, that's about right. I think the important thing is that to get it through, that it's the Iceland. It's not the bankers paying right now. It's the ISAVE deal says the Icelandic taxpayer will have to pay up, and the Icelanders feel that it's not fair that they are being left with all of the risk in this deal. They're being left with all of the burden, and we feel that we're being made a scapegoat for the financial system of Europe.
Well, you're really on the vanguard of the kind of economy that we're seeing in the past 5 to 10 years. The bankers on Wall Street and in Reykjavik and in the city of London make huge bets. When the bets don't pay off, then they force the government, or they blackmail the government, as we saw in America with Hank Paulson in front of Congress. They blackmail the government to give them hundreds of billions and trillions to bail out their banker friends. And then the government comes and says, to pay for that, we need to tax you or to impose austerity measures on you, the citizens. So the citizens end up paying for the bad debts. Now, according to Gordon Brown, one of the reasons he's able to do this to the people of Iceland, which is to force them to pay for the bad debts, is to classify them as terrorists. Are you a terrorist?
No, I'm not a terrorist, sir. I'm, and neither are the rest of Icelanders. And I think part of the outrage is pointed at part of the Icelandic nation's outrage is because that Britain used anti-terrorist laws against Iceland and put us on a list with Al Qaeda and North Korea and other such nations and bad people. So we haven't got any compensation for the immense damage that this caused to Icelandic interests and companies around the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. In other words, reputational damage to Icelandic companies by having the British government accuse them of being terrorists is huge, and Gordon Brown hasn't stumped up any of that compensation money. And
no. And what's interesting is that both contradicting that they are making the Icelandic taxpayer foot the bill, both Walter Bos, the Dutch finance minister, and Gordon Brown have publicly said in their own countries that they would never make their taxpayers pay the debts of a private company.
Now, you've got a website and you're gathering votes and interest or a campaign against the government signing this bill. Tell us more about that.
My organization is a grassroots organization called In Defense, and we started gathering signatures to petition the president to say no to not sign the bill into law. And the Icelandic constitution says that the president can decline to sign any bill into law, and then it has to be put to a referendum to the nation, and the nation will decide if it stays a law.
So, in other words, if I do the math here, every single Icelandic citizen has to give 12,000 euros effectively to 320,000 British and Dutch citizens, and so this is obviously not going down very well amongst a huge portion of the population there. What percentage of the population is against the deal?
About 70% have been against the deal from the beginning, and still are about 70%. But we have gathered the signatures of about a quarter of the voting population in our petition drive.
So what's the upside of this deal? Why would anyone want to be in favor of this deal to bail out British savers with this product?
Well, personally, I feel there's no upside. But the people who say we have to agree to this deal, they say that we have to because otherwise the international community will not allow Iceland to take part. We will not be able to get funds. We will not be able to build up our economy again. And pretty much it's a doomsday speculation that would rise. But I think that that's a bit of an overreaction.
Maybe Iceland doesn't want to be part of an economy that allows for this type of financial terrorism to take place. Maybe Iceland is right to try to pull back. Maybe they don't want to be a part of this American-style casino gulag capitalism.
Well, perhaps. But the important thing is to realize that in the last of August the Icelandic Parliament agreed to pay the ISAVE deal, but they put certain conditions on it, certain economic conditions and legal conditions that they wanted the UK and Holland to agree to, and the conditions were set so to make it certain that Iceland wouldn't go into national bankruptcy. Now these conditions have been nullified; they have been mostly taken out, and that's why we are opposing it. We say that we want to shoulder our part of the responsibility, and we want to do so in accordance with law. But this deal is not fair. It leaves all the risk with Icelanders. It leaves all the blame with Iceland's taxpayers, and it's not fair. And all we want is a fair deal. We want to pay. We want to shoulder our responsibility, but this is not a fair deal.
Well, the people in Iceland are getting screwed, just like the people in America are getting screwed, and the people in the UK are getting screwed, and people all over the world are getting screwed. In America, there's a campaign right now that people should take their money out of community banks. Take them out of big banks, the too big to fail banks, and put the money into community banks as a way to try to address the abuse and the terror of the financial institutions. It seems to me that a better campaign would be to have all these Americans and British people who are tired of getting screwed by the globalized financial terrorists to support your campaign in fighting against what is basically the bleeding edge of the institutions, the global institutions that are imposing neo-feudalism. They're imposing all kinds of draconian measures simply because they think they can get away with it. There's no economic justification whatsoever. They're purely being, opportunistic and larcenistic. The global community should support your campaign because you guys are really on the edge of this whole phenomenon.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to realize that it's in no one's interest that Iceland is in economical ruin. Then the Icelanders won't be able to maintain a standard of living that fits a European country, and neither Britain nor Netherlands will get their money back. So Iceland in economical ruins because of this deal is in nobody's interest. So
what is the incentive, therefore, to stay in Iceland?
Well, I think that's one of the big problems, because if this deal goes through, there will be no incentive to stay in Iceland. And we're looking at numbers that already this past year, 1% of the whole population has left the country. And we're looking at a lot higher numbers to leave in the years to come if this deal goes through. And Icelanders the population is only 317,000. We're not even 500,000 people. So like 3,000 people, 1% out of the working population is a lot of people for us. So it's going to be very hard to keep the young people and the educated and the working masses in Iceland, because and that's going to make it even worse. That's going to worsen the economic situation.
Okay, well, one person that did leave for sure is Thor Bjornsson. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing his name correctly either, but he's the first Icelandic billionaire. Now, is he contacted your group and said, I feel bad about helping the huge wholesale shakedown of your economy and I want to give some of that money back? Have you got that call?
No, I haven't.
How is his last name pronounced?
I think I'm talking about Björgúlfur Thor Björgúlfsson.
That's the fella. That's the fella. So he's one of the first Icelandic billionaires. He's one of these guys that leveraged the whole global economy by using...
Yeah, he was actually one of the owners. He was one of the owners of the Landsbanki that failed ISAFE Bank.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
He was one of the owners of the failed ISAFE Bank in Britain.
Okay, so he was clearly at the at the hot red core of this entire scandal, and he's living in Britain now, right?
I think so. I haven't seen him in a while.
Yeah, I believe he's living in Britain. Doesn't Britain have some kind of extradition agreement where they would send back all the financial terrorists back to Iceland? No.
Well, yeah, but I think maybe that's a part of the problem, that most of what they did was in effect legal, both in Iceland and in Europe.
Well, it's legal only if you consider this not to be racketeering. Now, if you consider it to be racketeering, then it's highly illegal, it's immoral, it's in fact some of the greatest crimes we've seen in 100 years.
There's an ongoing parliamentary investigation right now in Iceland that is investigating how this could happen and who had a part in it. So we're expecting a report from the parliamentary committee in maybe a month's time or so.
Do you have any faith that the parliamentary committee is not being influenced by the same banksters?
Well, I have to have a little faith because right now in Iceland the situation is so bad that if you don't have faith in the parliament, you can't have faith in anyone. From
where I stand, I think anyone who supports this idea of paying back the bankers, the governments vis-a-vis a taxpayer extorted payout is insane. All right, so thanks so much for being on the show, Johannes. I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Keiser Report. I want to thank my other guest, Stacy Herbert, political analyst, for being on the show as well. And if you want to send us an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. That's keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying, bye, y'all.